She stood in the middle of a cherry orchard, reciting a stranger's wedding from memory, every vow, every cue, without ever glancing at her notes. A man knelt nearby, pretending to fix a bolt that didn't need fixing. "You'd make a great bride someday," he said. She didn't even look up. "I'd need a groom for that," she answered. His hands went still. Remember that line? Because by the time this story ends, it means something neither of them saw coming. Emma Whitcomb ran her family's orchard the same way her father had before he passed. 6,000 cherry trees, a wedding venue built from nothing, and a will that gave her exactly 1 year of total control before the board could vote her out of every decision that mattered. That year was almost up. Nathan Kirby had been hired 3 months earlier to rebuild the ceremony arbor. Honest work, fair prices, a man who kept to himself and drove home every night to a 9-year-old son waiting with half-made dinner and half-done homework. Nobody knew much about him. Emma had noticed the way he moved, calm, precise, like a man who'd done far more in life than build stages for strangers. She hadn't let herself ask why. The night before the anniversary of her father's death, Emma's accountant reminded her the board wanted their vote locked in before the year ran out. Emma already knew. She'd felt it coming the way you feel a storm rolling in from 3 states away. The next morning, Nathan's son Sam showed up on the job site for the first time, 9 years old, dragging a toolbox almost bigger than he was. He found a scrap of ribbon in the grass and handed it to Emma, sure it belonged to a bride. She thanked him and tucked it into her pocket instead of the lost and found. She never really knew why she kept it. That same week, a branding consultant walked the property, camera around her neck, and stopped cold at the ceremony stage. She ran her hand along a seam with no visible nails, no brackets, a joint so precise she recognized it instantly. "This is an Alden and Rowe cut," she said. "I used a photo of this exact technique in a branding deck 10 years ago." She turned to Nathan in disbelief. "You built the floating stage in the Hamptons, the one every trade magazine wrote about. People thought you'd retired rich and vanished." Emma froze. The quiet carpenter she'd hired for local work had once built ceremony stages for the most photographed weddings on the East Coast, and he'd never said a single word about it in 3 months. "You could have told me," she said, once they were alone. "It wasn't relevant to the arbor," Nathan answered. Then, after a long pause, the truth came out. "I left that career 6 years ago. Same month my wife died. 40 weeks a year on the road works fine when there's 2 of you raising a kid. It doesn't work alone." Something in Emma cracked open just a little. She knew exactly what it meant to shut a door on a piece of your own life and never look back. Meanwhile, across town, Emma's cousin Dean Ashford sat behind a closed office door, dialing a number saved under a fake name. 12 months, right on schedule," he said. "The vote happens this week. Once her authority runs out, the board listens to me. Make sure that commission is confirmed in writing before I say a word to anyone." 2 days later, Dean stood in the boardroom with a chart showing rising maintenance costs, the kind of chart built to scare people before they could ask questions. He pushed to sell off the orchard's west parcel, the land that made up half of every wedding backdrop they had, to a resort company offering, in his words, a serious number. Emma pushed back hard. The vote wasn't happening that day, but she left the room knowing exactly how many days she had left, and exactly how much ground she still had to cover. That night, while the crew went home, Emma stayed behind, still in her jacket, still working. Nathan found her there and, instead of driving straight home, stayed too. They ended up eating sandwiches on overturned crates in the equipment shed, under one bare bulb, the smell of sawdust hanging in the air. And for the first time in months, the conversation drifted away from work. Nathan mentioned his late wife used to sketch wedding dresses, just for friends, nothing she ever charged for. Emma admitted something she hadn't told anyone in years, that she'd been engaged once, right there on that same property, 6 years earlier, and found out who her fiancé really was just 3 weeks before the wedding. She'd spent 2 years afterward convincing herself she stayed for the cherry trees, not because leaving meant walking past the exact spot where it all fell apart. "Do you regret it?" she asked him. "Leaving all of it behind?" "Some days," Nathan admitted. "Not the leaving. Just some days I miss being good at something in front of people who noticed. Out here, nobody knows what I used to be capable of." "I noticed," Emma said quietly, "before anyone ever told me who you were." Word of that night in the shed reached Dean before the week was over, small towns being what they are, and he used it exactly the way you'd expect. At the next board meeting, he stood up and questioned whether the CEO's judgment could really be trusted while she was spending her evenings alone with the contractor she'd personally hired. The room went quiet in that particular way that means agreement dressed up as concern. Emma kept her hands flat on the table until she trusted her voice. "I've run this company alone for a year," she said. "The numbers back up every decision I've made. If you want to question my judgment, question the numbers. Don't question who I have dinner with." The meeting ended with nothing resolved, which was its own kind of damage. When Nathan heard what happened, he showed up at her office that same evening, sawdust still on his arms. "You want me off the job? Say the word. I'll finish the stage and disappear." "No," Emma said, sharper than she meant to. Then, softer. "I don't want that. Whatever this is between us, I'm not letting Dean decide it for me." Meanwhile, the company's longtime accountant, Marion, hadn't stopped thinking about one strange line item buried in 2 years of records, a consulting fee paid quarterly to a company nobody recognized. Alone in the office one weekend, she traced it back through public filings to a shell entity with a P.O. box in town. And behind it, one name: Dean Ashford. The filing date stopped her cold. It was 14 months old, months before Walter Whitcomb's diagnosis, before he even got sick. Whatever Dean had planned, he'd started planning it while her father was still alive and trusting him completely. Marion brought everything to Emma first thing Monday morning: a shell company, a secret brokerage deal with the same resort company Dean had pushed the board to sell to, a commission agreement guaranteeing him a payout the moment the West parcel sale closed, timed perfectly for right after Emma's authority expired. He hadn't been protecting the company from rising costs at all. He'd been positioning himself to profit from selling it out from under her the entire time. Emma read it twice, hands steady, everything else in her exhausted. Nathan found her there minutes later and didn't ask what was wrong. He just pulled a chair beside her, not across from her, and stayed close enough that she could lean on him if she needed to. She did, just slightly. "I've been doing this alone for a year," she said. "I didn't know how much until right now." "You're not doing it alone today," he said. The board convened for the final vote 3 days ahead of deadline. Emma stood where Dean usually stood, no slideshow, just documents, and laid out everything: the shell company, the registered agent, the commission dated months before her father's death. Dean tried to spin it, pointing to Nathan in the back of the room, insisting her judgment was compromised by who she was involved with. "Ask yourselves," Emma said, calm as still water, "why a consulting fee to a company he secretly owns started showing up in our books a full year before my father died." The room went silent. Nathan stood, walked to the front, and dismantled every number Dean had presented, methodically, without malice, until nothing was left standing. One of the older board members, a friend of Emma's father for 30 years, finally looked at Dean directly. "Your uncle built half of what's under this roof. How did you sit across from him and never tell him what you'd already agreed to behind his back? Dean had no answer worth hearing. The vote came back 8-1. He was suspended on the spot, escorted out by the same board member who, 2 weeks earlier, had questioned whether Emma's judgment could be trusted. The days after moved slower, softer. Emma found herself walking the rows just to be there, no ledger in hand. A trade magazine reached out to Nathan, wanting to run a story on the man behind the famous floating stage everyone thought had disappeared for good. Along with it came an offer, freelance work, no relocation required, his name back in the spotlight of the industry he once ruled. He carried that offer around for a week, turning it over like a piece of lumber before shaping it into something. It was his son who settled it without meaning to, asking over dinner one night, "Are you going to keep building stages here forever?" 2 days later, Nathan turned down the standing offer and kept his life exactly where it was, in the town, at the orchard, with his son, and with her. At harvest's end, away from the string lights and the celebration, Nathan had built something small in the dark, an arbor built for no client, no invoice, just big enough for 2 people. Emma found it before anyone told her it was there. "You'd make a great bride someday," he said again, the same words as that very first afternoon, except nothing about his voice was the same anymore. "Then I suppose," Emma said, stepping closer, "I finally found my groom." He reached out and took her hand, the first time either of them let it be that simple. Behind them, the trees stood the way they had for 60 autumns, patient, unhurried, having watched this whole town grow up around them one season at a time. If this story kept you hooked till the very last word, that's exactly what we live for on this channel. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling us what part hit you hardest, and turn on notifications, because Aftermath Tales brings you a brand new story just like this one every single week.